all of a sudden I had the printers that can print like way more flexible than carbon, which already had by then $300 million in funding. And I just ate ketchup on toast and maybe invested $15,000. And that was lots of pain, lots of almost depressing nights. Like if you want to make your own sneaker line, just one design, you're looking at like millions of dollars in upfronts, which means like barriers just super high. And with 3D printing, it falls down to zero. If you want to sell 1,000 or 2,000, which usually with the big upfronts, which would never be economically viable, all of a sudden they become viable. So all of those bigger brands that sell fewer quantities, they all come rushing at us now. We have a really strong standing in the footwear industry now, but for us, that's just the start. We are 40 engineers and we are excited to build the future so that we can bring more and more products digital, and it starts with shoes.
Hello and welcome to 1 to 100, a podcast that takes you inside the most promising hypergrowth startups in a conversation with the founders themselves at the helm. Our goal is to give you the inside story alongside empirical analysis of a notable tech company that you might want to join. I'm your host, Usman Hanif, the author of the Why You Should Join newsletter. This week's 1 to 100 is all about Zellerfeld. For those tuning in, welcome to 1 to 100, where every week we sit down with the founders of some of the most notable hypergrowth startups. My name is Usman. I'm one of the co-authors of Why You Should Join and the host of the podcast. Today's company, Zellerfeld, has developed the world's first 3D printing technology to produce the world's first fully 3D printed shoes that are 100% recyclable. In 2023, Zellerfeld raised a $15 million seed round led by none other than Founders Fund, and have since then already inked collaborations with Louis Vuitton, Moncler, Heron Preston, and the shoes are often seen on the feet of icons like Justin Bieber, Lewis Hamilton, Kanye West. I'm super excited to be chatting with the man behind it all, Cornelius Schmitt, the company's founder and CEO. Cornelius, thank you so much for doing this.
So cool to be here.
Awesome. Well, you sell shoes, and you've raised millions of dollars from VCs and investors alike to do so. Definitely something you don't hear every day. I'm curious about the founding story. How did you come up with this problem, and why did you decide to start working on selling shoes?
To be quite real with you, actually there have been two parallel streams. One of those was really out of frustration. I mean, I loved shoes since I'm a kid, but to me it's kind of absurd that those big corporations still want us to buy always the same shoes like they sold 30 years ago, always the same Jordans, the same Sambas. Sambas, literally, like last year, the Samba became the shoe of the year, which is kind of absurd if you think about it, because it's a 70-year-old shoe. And for really sneakerheads that love shoes, or like shoe enthusiasts in general, that's really hard to swallow. So there has now been in footwear really a movement and a community which is trying to revolt more and more of what about the future? And not just swallowing what big corporations are feeding the consumer. So that's a big part. But in parallel, there was this other path where, I mean, I studied engineering, and there are every once in a while a couple of technologies that are just super exciting. And I don't know, like when I was 12, I was amazed by the iPhone. I was just amazed by like the finger, like the touch screen gestures and all of that stuff. That felt magical. I always wondered, okay, what will be the next technology that will feel as magical? And while studying engineering, I came across 3D printing. And for the first time, I felt this magic again, because all of a sudden you have this one machine that just with a push of a button can do whatever you want in physical. It's just software, like a product just becomes software. And this is basically then when those two passions converged, where I realized, hey, like maybe the way to solve or like to make shoes exciting again is actually to print them, because a big reason why footwear is so stale is because it is just super expensive to start and to innovate and to risk. Like if you want to make your own sneaker line, you have to not just sneaker line, just one design, you are looking at like millions of dollars in upfronts, and which means like barriers just super high. And with 3D printing, it falls down to zero. And yeah, over time, we basically now became the only means of production now where also those small size runs, basically, if you want to sell 1,000 or 2,000, which usually with the big upfronts, which would never be economically viable, all of a sudden they become viable. So all of those bigger brands like that sell fewer quantities, they all come rushing at us now. And that's super exciting because those are also the coolest shoes. And yeah, that's how we got there.
Yeah. So you decided to work on it. It sounds like, one, because you're fed up with how shoes were. And then two,
Yeah.
you were really fascinated with 3D technology. And you said,
For
hey,
sure.
let's put
For
the
sure.
two together.
I mean, let's be real. Like the future, like everything got digital, right? So over time, like we are not sending letters anymore. We are sending emails now. We are not developing photos in a lab anymore. We are actually taking iPhone snaps, which cost nothing. It's all digital. And the question now is, like, when do more products become digital? And with 3D printing, more and more products get digital. And like, we just believe shoes is a really, really great start, much like what books were for e-commerce with Amazon, for example. And we just want to push it. Like, and this is also what people, I mean, we have a really strong standing in the footwear industry now, but for us, that's just the start. I mean, we are 40 engineers and we are excited, but we are, as you can imagine, not the passion overlap isn't always like shoes with engineers, but most of the engineers that also work here are just excited to build the future so that we can bring more and more products digital, and it starts with shoes.
It sounds like, from what you're saying, sort of 3D printing shoes has been a no-brainer. So I guess the question then is, why weren't people doing that? Like, why weren't these big corporations? I mean, they know about 3D printing as well. Why didn't they turn to printers for their shoes?
I think the biggest reason is because it wasn't possible for a very, very long time. And like in the early years, like we had like loads of naysayers that said like, this will never be possible. And it also was true. Like for the first years, those printed shoes were way worse than shoes that you could buy. They were worse and more expensive. But over time, they become better and cheaper. So all of a sudden, we now have this movement where actually now, I mean, that's also 8 years ago when we started, or when I started in the student dorm. Now, back then, when we said, yeah, we want to get printed shoes on every foot, we were called crazy. But now people believe it. Now the only question that they have is still, will it scale? But like everybody by now, over those 8 years, everybody now believes in the shoes because they got better than traditional shoes.
Yeah. You said it was impossible, and now you're printing them. I take it that you solved, quote unquote, the impossible. What made it so impossible? What were those challenges that the naysayers pointed as making this impossible? And what did you guys invent to solve that?
Yeah, so before our seed round, there were mainly two things that we solved that nobody else solved before. And this was mostly like super flexible printing. So like really to print materials that like basically are really, really flexible, and that doing that reliably. Like that was a huge challenge that nobody else in the world solved. But the problem is, once you print flexible, and we didn't even think about that back in the day, once you print flexible and we print them like this for everybody that's watching the video, but while printing, also the shoe wobbles since it's so flexible and unstable. So what we then needed to do, second big innovation, was basically we needed to reinvent multi-material printing. So now we have like super soft materials, but also, I don't know if you can hear that, but a very stiff material that basically holds the shoe in place as it's being printed. And now the cool thing is also this material is a biodegradable plastic, which also dissolves in water. So basically now, for every shoe that we print, the process is the same. And in the end, we just put it in water and it dissolves. And now we can print those shoes like anyone else, like even with like textile uppers and like things that people didn't even believe will be ever possible.
Wow.
Those were the main things.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, for those who are listening to audio only, I think they just missed out on a little bit of a tree of seeing the shoes and their capabilities firsthand. But sort of diving into those two things a bit more, the first you talked about was making these shoes super flexible. When I was, in college and doing 3D printing, everything I got out was like plastic, right? It was kind of rock solid. So seeing what you're doing with those shoes is kind of crazy. Maybe without revealing any trade secrets, how does one approach that problem of making these super flexible? Is this an invention with the printer, or is this an invention with the nozzle path? What are you guys doing there?
So first of all, maybe for those that are not so super familiar with 3D printing, there are basically three base technologies out there. Like one is called SLA. It basically works with a resin, which is a liquid. Maybe you have seen that with carbon, Adidas carbon, like the midsole. That is like a liquid resin base, but super toxic. So we said, if you want to get printed shoes on every foot in the world, it will not be with toxic production processes. That was the first requirement that we had. Then there's another technology called SLS, selective laser sintering, which is basically powder based. But the problem with that powder base is you have to dig out the printed product out of a huge box of powder, which makes it really, really expensive in post-processing and very hard to automate. So we also said it's too expensive and hard to automate. So also that is not going to work. And then there is like an often laughed upon technology called FDM, which is basically you have a so-called filament, basically a thread that is on a spool. You push that into a hot nozzle, much like like a glue stick or like a glue gun. And you have to push that material from the spool. It's like a thread. You have to push it into that hot nozzle. And as you can imagine, if you have like a hard, stiff material, you can push it like a stick. You can create lots of force by like just pushing that stick into that hot nozzle. But if you have like mostly like a wet noodle, like you can push as much as you want, like you will not be able to create much pressure. And that is one of the core things that we solved. And yeah, that was basically the main thing that made our printers unique up until that point. And then for that multi-material, we created a tool changing system, which also back then, like we hired a guy called Mark. He was basically our first employee and now also our CTO. And he was the legend in multi-material printing by switching out different nozzle heads while printing. So our printers actually, while they print those like thousands of layers, they're actually also switching thousands of times the nozzle. And that is very, very unique. Like you always have to think about, okay, how to make the carriage much like a race car. You want to have it light and so on. And we looked at different techniques from CNC machining and we put them for the very first time ever in a printer, which now lets us do all those crazy things. Like in the future, we will have millions of colors and whatnot. And once we had that as a base, we started building out those 200 printer farm that you see behind me for those that are on video. And with those, we could then started. I mean, nobody has used like a printer farm like this for full like industrial production. And over time, we then realized it is crazy how much you can do, not only with hardware, which was like flexible printing and multi-material printing, but also software. Because as you already said, the nozzle paths is like a huge thing. If you think about, maybe I can show this one here. If you think about a shoe like this here you can look at one layer. And just through software, you will see, for example, like one shoe is 2,000 layers, let's say. But then you ask yourself, okay, does every part, does it, like obviously the more layers you print, the longer time it will take. And print time is a huge thing in scalability. So you ask yourself, okay, how can we get the print time down? And once we started with the seed rod, it was maybe 150 hours a shoe. Now we are maybe down to, let's say, 24 hours. For example, just 1 day per shoe, we got away by printing the midsole here, by printing it every third layer instead of every layer. And that is just software. And so instead of printing the entire shoe 2,000 layers, we print 60% of the shoe, the midsole. We print it just every third layer, basically, 600 layers. And that alone made a day. And no other software could do this. Or now the question is, okay, this is like a traveling salesman problem. How to, with a nozzle, basically reach every point of the shoe with the least amount of direction changes. So much like a traveling salesman problem, if you need, let's say, 6 million direction changes throughout the entire print, then you will be much faster if you can do the same with 2 million. And this is basically what we do all day. And the crazy thing is that although we already went from 150 hours to 24 hours, like there is still so much where we believe like very soon it will be like 2 or 3 hours. And that also makes all this operation at a point like incredibly profitable, which obviously not only excites us as product people, but then also the VCs in terms of the financials.
I mean, you gave an absolute masterclass on 3D printing and from the legend himself doing it, which is great. So I take it that the printer is what sort of made this shoe even possible? And you guys now focus on this nozzle path into optimizing the shoe, right? How can you sort
Yes.
of, I dare I use the word, cut corners in a way to print these shoes much faster based off this like
And
optimal
everything
nozzle
goes
path?
hand in hand, because you can imagine it's also a difference if you are making a truck, like, doing 6 million direction changes, or a sports car. So depending on how light the carriage is, you can decelerate and accelerate much faster around every corner. So like hardware, software, materials, like those three things go hand in hand. And this is also where we have the advantage compared to just buying some printers off the shelf, and then we can really optimize it. Like back in the day, I always remember I always was a big Apple fanboy, and I always was with my MacBook, which didn't have the like the best specs, but nonetheless, it was always faster than any of those Windows PCs my friends had, just because software and hardware was so perfectly in harmony. And that's what we do with our machines as well.
Hey, 1 to 100 will be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by WorkOs. If you're building a B2B SaaS app, at some point your customers will start asking for enterprise features like SAML authentication, SCIM provisioning, role-based access control, and audit trails. That's where WorkOs comes in, with easy-to-use and flexible APIs that help you ship enterprise features on day one without slowing down your core product development. Today, some of the hottest startups in the world are already powered by WorkOs. These include Perplexity, Vercel, Jasper, and Webflow. WorkOs also provides a generous free tier of up to 1 million monthly active users for user management, making it absolutely the perfect authentication and authorization solution for growing companies. It comes standard with rich features like bot protection, MFA, roles and permissions, and more. If you're currently looking to build SSO for your first enterprise customer, you should consider using WorkOs. Integrate in minutes and start shipping enterprise plans today. You talked about how you guys have invented all these different technologies in the printer. Had you been working on this since college? Were you just in your dorm room making this printer from scratch? Those printers we see in the back, how did those come to be? I want to hear a little bit about that personal story.
So in German, probably it's not a saying in English, but like we always say, if someone is not really handy, like if someone is not really great at building things, we say that person has two left hands, basically two hands that don't do much. And that is definitely what you could say about me. So when I was like, I had the most like horrible experiences. Like I really wanted to build it, and I did it in the end. But like the moment I was able to impress other builders, like probably someone else could have done it faster than me. But like I ate lots of shit and figured it out over the time, up until the point where I was able to impress guys like Mark, for example, with how flexible my printers were able to print. Literally from scratch, a guy that couldn't really even hold a wrench right. Like all of a sudden, I had the printers that can print like way more flexible than Carbon, which already had by then $300 million in funding. And I just ate ketchup on toast and maybe invested $15,000. And that was lots of pain, lots of almost depressing nights in my student dorm in Zellerfeld, which is also where the name comes from of the company. Over time, but really struggled, but failed once, like step by step forward. And over time, like started reaching out to a couple of cool Instagram designers that just did cool shoe concepts. And I just offered them for free to print the shoes, because I was also like, let's put those machines that I've built to test. And over time, like really hype grew up until the point where like guys like Kanye started calling us up for 3 times a day. And yeah, like all of those little steps, like people started offering money, and very opportunistic. We just said yes once in a while. So it grew and grew and grew.
No, I mean, you guys have quite the community behind you. We'll definitely touch on that. I wanted to talk a little bit about how this manufacturing process fares against humans making shoes, right? So obviously Nike, Adidas, other big shoe manufacturers have these factories that are mainly run by humans. I'm sure they have some degree of automation as well, but you guys are fully 3D printed, and your production plan, which you guys call the farm, as you can see, just has printers and not a row of, sort of human labor standing there. How does that kind of match up? Are you cost effective or more time effective? And if not, how do you guys view that in terms of competing with maybe some of these other shoe manufacturers?
I really see the switch kind of a no-brainer like digital photography, like 2 decades ago, basically, where it is such a no-brainer. If you imagine, okay, you're a shoe manufacturer and now you have to produce in Asia, in a low labor cost country, like you have huge supply chains, you have lots of work to do. Like an Air Force One is 210 manual labor steps and 70 of those need to be done by a really highly skilled person. You can't just hire someone off the street and make an Air Force One. No, like you really need to be a skilled, which is also a huge reason why like people always say, yeah, let's bring manufacturing back. Yeah, it's not that easy if you really need millions of people that can actually like work on a sewing machine and stuff like that to a really high fidelity degree. So that is really one thing where you have to imagine those printers, they run automatically. It's basically just material cost and a little bit of energy, which is like really not a big deal. And this is also where you can clearly see the like advantage, because it's a no-brainer. Instead of having a digital photograph being developed in a lab, it's a very expensive process. But the moment you just make it digital with an iPhone, like you can store hundreds of thousands of pictures on your iPhone and they don't cost a thing. And here it's really just the material input. And you can have those printers anywhere, right? Like, for example, if you are in Asia and make your shoes, you still have logistics costs. You first have to pay labor to make them, like have lots, like, and you have to pre-produce them, which is another huge risk with inventory risks and stuff. Then you have to ship them to the US. You have import customs and all of that stuff. And then you don't even know if you will sell them because you have to produce them 18 months in advance. It's a shit show. And here we can just push a button, just pay material cost, no labor. Like those machines can stand anywhere. This is already cheaper than sweatshops, what many people might not believe. And the only problem really is how to make it scale. But like on the cost side, it's material and energy, which is insane. And then also a big reason why we also do this is, like I'm a big hip hop fan, also kind of old school hip hop. And there's this song called Shadow Business from the Jedi Mind Tricks. I don't know if you know it, but it basically says, is life worth living if you're living in hell, if your mind is confined to a prisoner cell? Which is also a huge thing where when you think about how we treat those people in those sweatshops, it's insane. And when you think about the future, do you still want everyone to hand assemble your product in the worst conditions? And that reminds me very much of the early computer age. I don't know, Usman, do you know why computers are called computers?
No, I do not.
I love that story because computers in the early days was a job description. There were, much like here in this room, there are printers. There were actually huge rooms, halls full of women sitting on, like, how do you call this? Slide sticks, doing calculations. So you had to call up basically the manager of this hall and say, hey, I have a complex calculation to solve. And then there were like lots of women sitting in a room. Like for anyone listening, you should Google that, computer as a job description. That was before everything was automated, but it was like basically a job to be a computer. You would call up and they would do computations. And over time, those computers got automated by like transistors and stuff. And this is how I see this as well. Imagine now every time you want to do a calculation on your phone, you would first have to call up someone. That's absurd. And this is what I believe how in the future generations we will look at like people that assemble shoes. Like I hope future generations will be like, what the fuck? People were actually doing this type of a low value work. And for those naysayers that say, oh, aren't you killing jobs then? No, look, I'm happy if, I don't know, a sweatshop, a factory manager is only paying someone 50 cents an hour. Like, I'm happy to pay someone, like, I don't know, $10 an hour to build printers, because then that their value per hour is so much increased. And I think we as society would benefit so much higher. We are not killing jobs. And this is what I love, why I'm a techno-optimist. With this technology, we actually increase the value of each hour. I think that's a big thing, which is which goes beyond just making cooler shoes. No, this is society shifting and pushing technology and pushing society out of this crazy, inhumane conditions and right into the future. I could talk for hours about this.
And the passion radiates. It's honestly very inspiring. And I think what you're saying is completely true. We will look back and, hopefully sweatshops and those conditions are a dated thing that we, can kind of look back at and say, what the hell were we doing there? And you mentioned this too. There's obviously a lot of talk about, bringing manufacturing back to America. Obviously, you hear it from like politicians. You also hear buzzes of it from VCs on tech Twitter. Do you think the answer is 3D printing? You touched on it a little bit about, we obviously don't have the human labor count to even compete.
Yep.
Is printing sort of our answer?
For sure. And not only to bring manufacturing back, but also, again, as I said, to bring people into the future. I mean, look at Elon. When Elon has his colony on Mars, what are we going to do once Apple ships a new iPhone? Do we want to put 3 starships full of iPhones so that so that the colony can have the newest version of iPhones? This will not work. Once we are like multiplanetary, like we need a solution where like we can't ship like products around anymore. Like much like how we ship information around now, like this needs to be digital. Like those guys there need to have, in the best case, a Zellerfeld printer one day. And like there needs to be something like an app store of things where you can say, yo, next iPhone, oh, they just dropped, yo guys, did you hear? Those guys on Earth, they just dropped the new iPhone. Okay, let's print it. I don't know, $20 the download or whatever. And then they print it on Mars. This is how the future should look like. And obviously not only thinking about multiplanetary, also like here, I don't know, in globalization, it would be so much easier if we wouldn't need to ship products around, if we wouldn't need to pre-produce them, if there wouldn't be such huge upfront risk. I mean, look how beautiful the software age was. You, as a student at Stanford, could have an idea which solves a big problem for like lots of people, and then through the internet, with a push of a button, you can make a website and distribute it to billions of people with a click. And this is what I love about 3D printing, because now we have a technology where you, as a product innovator, you can also be just a student in your dorm, and you can have an idea in the morning. You can 3D model that idea throughout the day. In the evening, you push it onto something like an app store of things. And like in the evening, if everybody had a printer at home, which will happen at one day, like it's just a download. And within one day of you having the idea, you can distribute it to billions of people. This is when physical things, when innovation will flourish again and physical things. And this is the reason why we work our asses off here, 100-hour work weeks, because we believe in this future and we want to make it happen. And shoes is just the start.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you just said it right now, shoes are just the start. You kind of touched upon it with the App Store idea. I'm getting the sense that these printers could probably do more than shoes, and that's kind of the direction the big vision is.
Absolutely. Obviously, it makes sense to ruthlessly focus. I just love how Amazon did it with books. I mean, for so long, they IPO'd as a bookstore. And today, like nobody knows them as just a bookstore, but like they IPO'd as a bookstore. And if there was a blueprint, like I would love for this to be also our blueprint, where like people will know of us for footwear, but also when you look into the world, like everybody talks about 3D printing. You see the headlines, printed housing in Dubai, or researchers just printed the world's first heart, which gives like hope to all the people that need organ transplants and stuff. You see those headlines, or like Airbus is printing components for their airplanes. But like all of it is still, 3D printing is still very confined to hobbyists or like industrial applications. But what do you have that is 3D printed? What does the consumer have? And we really hope with our product, which really elevates 3D printing, we hope to also build a consumer product that it is industry defining, that people realize, wow, the future is printed. Wow, I bought a shoe from Zellerfeld, and because they are custom fitted, because of 3D printing, every shoe can be different, because they're custom fitted, those are the most comfortable shoes I've ever had, because they're made for my foot, for my gait. I move so much more efficient in life. blah, blah, blah. Wow, 3D printing is a great technology. If we can achieve this, then I think we have succeeded. And I love, for example, what ChatGPT and OpenAI did there. AI was obviously out before ChatGPT, but with ChatGPT, OpenAI brought AI to everyone's fingertips. Now everyone experienced AI for the first time. This is how people will experience 3D printing.
Yeah, yeah. You could even maybe draw some parallels to what Tesla did with electric cars, right? Sort of created a movement around it. Yeah.
For sure. And Tesla did it very well. They made the product sexy. I mean, you had the Toyota Prius before, but who wanted to drive that? Like, you had to make it sexy first. This is why we are happy to work with a Louis Vuitton, why we are happy to work with a Moncler, why we are happy that Justin Bieber and Posty and like 2 Chainz and like all those cool people are wearing our shoes, because that makes it desirable. If we want to get 3D printers into every home one day, we have to make it desirable. Otherwise, we are just a Toyota Prius, and that will not work.
Yeah, yeah. Coming back, you talked about the consumers and making them, join into this movement. I guess this begs a little bit of the question of like, why 3D, right? For the folks listening to the podcast right now, when it's time for them to go buy a new pair of shoes, why should they turn to 3D printed shoes? What do you think are some of the unique benefits that 3D printed shoe offers, or that you guys offer, that maybe a normal manufactured shoe doesn't or couldn't?
When I was still in my student dorm and building those printers, obviously there was a time when the printers were good and I needed to learn how to make shoes. And for that, I was very fortunate. I reached out to a guy called Gary, and he is a shoe design professor at Parsons and FIT, which are the 2 most prestigious fashion universities in the US. And he taught me how to make shoes, like what it means, like what fit means, what a shoe last is, like all of that stuff. And if there was one thing that he taught me, then it's like through many different exercises, he taught me design is why people pick up a shoe, and comfort is why they choose to wear it every day. I think especially on those 2 fronts, printed shoes outperform whatever, like any other shoe. On the one hand, printed shoes, since it's so much easier to innovate, the designs are much riskier and also much cooler. But on the other hand, also because we can scan your foot and make you a custom fitted pair of shoes, they are so much more comfortable. And if you probably many people in the audience listening to this right now, I could also imagine maybe even VCs listening in. Like over the last decades, there was this whole revolution in footwear as well, where, for example, brands like Nike managed to put running shoes and trainers on people's feet and validated them even like with wearing a suit. I would say even especially in Silicon Valley and like really tech-driven communities, like dress shoes became less and less popular, and trainers became more and more popular. And if you think about it, it's very, very obvious why, because they're just way more comfortable and easier to put on, and your feet don't hurt so much when you come home in the evening and stuff like this. And now just imagine how this will feel if you weren't put into someone else's shoes, which is what Adidas and Nike makes. They make, like with the shoe that you're wearing right now on your foot, if you're not wearing a Zellerfeld shoe, those were made for someone else's foot. And feet are so crazily different. You don't see it because like you don't look at feet usually, but like they are crazy different. And the fact that shoe sizes are just length is insane. And yeah, I think the reason why people will switch is because printed shoes are so much more optimized in terms of comfort, in terms of design. It is probably a revolution, much like those trainers were taking over those dress shoes. It is just a different level. And once you have a printed shoe, you will never want to go back. So this is a very natural revolution, which we don't have to push with marketing dollars. In fact, we have a $0 marketing budget. This will come naturally.
Yeah, yeah. And to get that customizability, do you have people scan their feet? Like, how are you guys making these shoes for the person?
Yeah, and yeah, you buy a slot on Zellerfeld.com. It's just $10. You then take 2 pictures of your feet, and because there's a database in the background with 40 million foot scans, like an AI basically matches it to how your foot basically looks based on those two pictures. And it's absolutely insane how precise it is. It is like, in terms of width, for example, precise by a millimeter, in terms of length, like 2 millimeters and stuff, which is like within one size, like a width can have a range of 20 millimeters. So a millimeter or two in width is like super precise. We can categorize your feet very, very well. If you have a wide forefoot, a narrow heel, a high instep, how your arch is shaped and all of that stuff. And then we can make you the most custom shoe like you will have ever had. And yeah, it doesn't cost anything because like it's just software. Fit is just software all of a sudden. And this is also then the cool thing. You will get your first pair of shoes once you have chosen a design, which ranges between $160 and $250 usually. You choose a design, and then you get your shoes to your doorstep. And then the fun part starts as well, because you will get your shoes, you will put them on, and like you immediately get a message, hey, how do your shoes fit? Hey, give us feedback to how they fit. Would you like them to be a little bit more loose in the instep and stuff? And then we can customize those shoes with you over the future, so that usually after the first feedback you have given us, those shoes are unlike anything you have ever had on your foot. And then you have to imagine, then we know how you like your shoes better than anyone else in the world. We can satisfy your personal comfort needs better than anyone else in the world. And because we have this two-sided marketplace where all those brands and new creators, much like YouTube, every day launch new designs, the design variety grows so big that we know how you like your shoes, and there will be millions of designs in the future, much like YouTube or Spotify or whatever. And that is also why many smart investors join this, because we believe if we execute this well, everybody will buy their shoes there or this way.
And so I take it that you're sort of building the largest database of feet out there, and you could probably do a lot with that, right? You mentioned an AI that you guys use to sort of bucket people and find the optimal fit. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about it is that also, imagine what you can do with it in the future also. Imagine you can place your phone on the wall at home in your living room, and you can just walk how you would walk, like barefoot. And we can analyze your gait. And all of a sudden, your left shoe and your right shoe can have like slightly different insoles into it. So much like braces, we can, with every step or with every shoe that you get from us, we can tighten them a little bit more, so that over time we can really help you like move in life in the most efficient way possible with every step you take. And things like that, we just find so fascinating. I mean, footwear is just such an unoptimized product. And I don't know, for the people that are on their phones or like on their computer listening right now, I would urge them to just Google, like that's also in our pitch deck. It's a very dominant, one of the first slides. It's like a 2,000-year-old Roman shoe, like from the Roman Empire. And it's basically a shoe that looks like today. It is insane how little has changed over thousands of years. When you see that shoe, you're like, oh my God, I could have seen this in the store earlier today. And that is really something where footwear is such an industry. It's a $500 billion industry that hasn't been changed or improved at all over thousands of years, which is just insane when you think about it. And like imagine also the value that you provide people, not only in performance or like in their everyday life. Like the fact that we can make shoes for you that give you the confidence and the security that you will not have back pain, or like the risk for back pain in your later life diminishes. Like all of that is worth so much more than just having a cool pair of shoes.
Yeah, no, I was actually going to ask that. And I wonder if you guys have dived into that at all. I'm sure there's a health component to this as well, by wearing shoes that are meant for you, and sort of, maybe it's the soles or the arches, like it has some long-term health component as well, right?
100%. And that's so crazy. You would not believe how different, and like people, you can go on the street and ask 100 people on the street, are your shoes fitting to your feet? 100 people would say, yeah, my shoes fit really great. But then you look at the feet and the shoes and you're like, oh my God, this person is wearing 2 sizes too small. This person is 2 sizes too big. Like how much preference because you're never taught what to wear. You're never taught like what support, where you need support and all of that stuff. Like you just buy shoes and you assume, oh yeah, that feels kind of good. But what feels good is also heavily influenced by your like behavior that you had before. And there are so many things that people do wrong where I think it would be really good for many people to have like actually to get their feet scanned and actually get a proper pair of shoes. And yeah, obviously with the feet being the medium of everyone, like to the ground where all of your weight is being put on and stuff, it is a component that is really often overlooked, where footwear becomes actually a piece of tech or should be a piece of tech. And right now it's super low tech. It's millions of people get the same shoes, although millions, like everybody walks differently. It's insane.
Yeah, it makes complete sense why you would want a shoe that fits you and not just something that you can pick up at the store. I wanted to sort of shift over a little bit to some of the folks that you guys have started working with already. These include some pretty big names like Louis Vuitton, Moncler. How do you even go about partnering with these brands? How does that process look?
So as I said before, we have like $0 marketing budget. So every brand that we work with is basically inbound, which is like a great blessing over time, because we are kind of the like in the industry known as the rebels of footwear, kind of the footwear punks, you could say. Like lots of people know, like every of those big like footwear legends, they all know of us already, and obviously they are all interested because they're also sometimes a little bit bored in their day job, and they also want to learn what we do and how the future looks like. So they reach out just out of curiosity. And very quickly, we often realize, hey, it makes sense to make a shoot together, just also for them to learn how it is in the new age. And there we have been really lucky that Moncler and Louis Vuitton have been one of those brands, two of those brands, but also many others like Reigns or Pangaya or I don't know, Chris Brown did a shoe with us because he was so curious. And all of those, obviously, every single time we learn a little bit more. And I'm a huge fan of our COO, Ben. Ben comes from Airbus. And he, like, very early of what we have been doing here, he said, hey, it would be really great to go through like one of those big corporation processes, which are a pain in the butt, and really just learn what it takes to also go through their quality checks. And he always said at Airbus, they always had Singapore Airlines. So when when Airbus wants to launch a new airplane, they always first go to Singapore Airlines because they are so picky and so demanding as a customer that if Singapore Airlines actually says yes to the airplane, then for all those other airlines, they also say yes. They always ask, and Singapore Airlines said yes to this. And then as Airbus, you can say, yeah, Singapore Airlines said yes to that. And that validates it. And this is also a huge reason why we went through hell, you could say, to go through like what Louis Vuitton sells to their customers, which is a really rigorous quality assurance check. And we learned so much. At times, it was the most demotivating and frustrating thing that we could have imagined. We almost broke Zellerfeld in the process because it's insane. You have a sub-millimeter small flaw, and any person on earth would be like, oh, that's a perfectly fine shoe. But since Louis Vuitton, especially their quality assurance department in Italy, since they know like high quality leather shoes and leather patches that have literally no flaws, they were like super demanding on us. And we had to shift delivery timelines like week by week by week. But in the end, we made it and we were really proud. And to give you a sense of how it felt, it was really like it's clear to us that if we were to do only shoes for Louis Vuitton, we would never scale, because it feels like, I don't know, imagine the early days of Tesla, where they had all those panel gaps, inconsistencies and stuff. And imagine Tesla would have needed the okay by the quality assurance director of Rolls-Royce for every single car that they shipped. This is how it felt, like going through, like it's insane. Like I have so much respect for every supplier of Louis Vuitton and for every product. I can tell you it is different to many of the other brands out there. It's crazy. And this is what we learned there. And like now we can say, hey, we actually managed to fulfill those customers, to actually people that pay thousands of dollars for our shoes. And now, obviously, with those learnings, we can now fulfill any other brand much easier now.
So I'm hearing that, Louis Vuitton, Moncler, some of these brands definitely put in the time when it comes to making sure their quality is up to par. In terms of how these companies are, what did you think of them? Are they pretty tech forward? I mean, the fact that they're coming inbound to you for 3D printing, I'd say at least is a pretty good sign that they're constantly looking ahead. But how does sort of their processes look?
Probably the main reason why they reach out is because they're intrigued by the innovation, especially the people working on the product side. We see lots of brands where the designers, the main creatives, are actually leaving big brands to start their own things on Zellerfeld.com. So obviously brands need to stay awake of those like trends when their best creative talent is losing interest in working for basically, because let's be real, if you launch a shoe and you're a designer, you don't make the design. It's like the marketing department that tells you, okay, we need a clock in 18 months and it should have those colors because those will be trendy, which is not super compelling as a designer because you want to be in charge of the design and not the marketing department telling you what trends might be there in 18 months. And so obviously those brands reach out also being very innovation intrigued and fascinated by what we can do. But often, and maybe that's also because of the scale that we are still at, often in the hundreds or like low thousands of pairs that we deliver for those, because we have to be selective. It still remains more of a marketing play, but that is changing more and more as we are scaling, as we get faster in printing. So since those collaborations were like already a year and more ago, now like it's the first time that actually it's not just a marketing stunt, it's actually like also real number driving factors where it really can make a dent in one of those big companies' bottom lines, at least for their footwear departments.
And another thing is on the celebrity front. You have, Justin Bieber, Post Malone, Lewis Hamilton. I've seen those pictures on Instagram too, where they're walking around and I'm like, are those Zellerfelds on his feet? That must be a pretty cool feeling. I mean, to make something and to have these big guys walking around with it. How did these people, how are they wearing your shoes? Did they just find it themselves? Did you guys send them to them? Like how did that work?
Bro, it's insane. It's actually in a way that the way we realize that they are wearing them is because someone sends us a text. Yo, did you see this picture on Instagram? And we are like, what the fuck? How did he get one of our shoes? And it's actually every time it's intriguing. Obviously, we have some celebrities that buy from us. And sometimes we don't see that because I don't know, like you sometimes don't know the real names or the names that they buy them under. Like sometimes it's their wives and stuff. But then like, when you go through the orders, like you realize, okay, this pair went to Atlanta, for example. Okay, so this celebrity, like you realize how it works, but especially those celebrities, you have to imagine, I don't know. Let's take Justin Bieber as an example. He and his friends, they are often seen wearing Balenciaga. But Balenciaga has, let's say, 6 different designs out there of this season. And all of those designs, everybody has, like all of those celebrities have those 6 pairs. And if you also are a celebrity that want to be seen as a trendsetter, like if you have one of those shoes, you're not a trendsetter. You're just like, you have what everybody else has. So there's actually a cool book about this, which describes how the iPod became like this huge phenomenon. And I love that book because they talk about the L train wars, like from Manhattan to Williamsburg. This is where basically in the early days of the iPod, there were the so-called L train wars, where people were like on their iPod. Basically, the person won who had the most niche music taste. So if you knew some artists that the other person didn't know, like you were like, oh shit, you're like more into culture. You're deeper into culture than the other person who just listens to the top 100 hits. And this is how I feel this revolution, especially in the celebrity space a little bit right now, where guys like Justin Bieber, they want to wear those Namis by Finrush Taylor, who is an independent designer in London who has sold maybe 100 pairs, but because of his very unique design language, Justin Bieber says, okay, those shoes are cool. And nobody else in the world knows it yet. So I'm going to be known as the guy who made this Finrush Taylor big. And this is then all of a sudden, not just, I mean, obviously our shoes are the most comfortable shoes in the world, but like all of a sudden, Justin Bieber can also show that he's the trendsetter. he sees trends before others. He listens, on the L Train Wars analogy, his shoe taste is more niche and more deep into culture than a Kris Jenner wearing just some Balenciagas. This is, I believe, a huge reason why lots of those celebrities actually wear our shoes, because they also want to show, hey, I'm not just like a fashion victim. No, I make the trends. And I believe that's pretty cool.
You know, a celebrity that comes to mind who also was really big in footwear because some of their revolutionary shoe designs is Kanye West and Yeezys. I take it that, you know, Kanye has seen these shoes before. Has he ever interacted with these shoes? I believe he's been spotted with them before.
Oh man, like Ye and my relationship go back years. And obviously at some point he reached out and like he wanted to acquire Zellerfeld in the early days and stuff like that. Wild stories. Especially, I don't know, have you seen the boots that we printed for him? Like they were like basically for the Yeezy Season 9 show. It's a story. So you have to imagine.
Well, let's hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, Ye was like, obviously he had a huge deal with Adidas a couple of years ago where the Adidas Yeezy was a big thing and I adored them. And the consumers adored them because, as we said earlier, most of the big corporations were feeding always the same stuff. So Yeezy was shining as a star, as a brand who challenged new things, like with the foam runner or the 350s, like new silhouettes that were really exciting, were pushed into the market. And this is also obviously what hooked Ye very much and made him sign the deal with Adidas. But you have to see that over time, like also to those big corporations, making new things is quite hard. And Ye had a big fashion show coming up in Paris in October 22, I believe that was. And he had those boots that he was teasing for years in the collaboration with Balenciaga and Adidas. And while he was approaching the show and everything was a little bit chaotic, you could say, he didn't have one major signature piece for that show that could really like make the show. And he teased those boots for 12 months on his Instagram and stuff. But Adidas and Balenciaga could never get him a real prototype that was functional and wearable on a show. So like he had a show on Monday, and on Friday he hit us up because we know each other. And he was like, yo, Cornelius, I have the show coming up on Monday. Now it's Friday. I have no idea what to do, but I need those boots. Can you do them? And back then we never printed boots before. And we said, hey, let's at least try. I can't promise you that, but we printed them over the weekend, what Adidas and Balenciaga couldn't do in 12 months. And like then I flew first flight, Hamburg to Paris. I flew there, brought them to Ye. And once he put them on, he looked me dead in the eye and basically said, Cornelius, if you can do this in a weekend, what Adidas and Balenciaga can't do in 12 to 18 months, what do I need Adidas and Balenciaga anymore for? And he was like jumping in them. He was happy. And I was happy because I just made a customer happy, right? But what I didn't expect was that all of a sudden he started like saying all those crazy things to basically cancel himself in the end with all the horrible things that he said. And back then also, I mean, we are Germans, we are very conservative. We didn't know how to react there. So we rather tried to keep that all to the minimum. But I think now we can say it, that most of the things that he said there also was that those boots, although they had a couple of flaws because we never printed a boot before, they made him feel that freedom again, which was the main reason why he joined Adidas in the first place. And you could see the frustration in his face. It was never about the money. It was about expressing yourself. And so while his process of canceling and saying all those horrible things that he said, he was always wearing the shoes because they made him feel like someone who's in charge again. Because all of a sudden he could decide again what he's been wearing and not being like bound to others. And that is also a big thing where he realized that I was with Finrush Taylor, who is a big friend of mine in London, because we were that weekend together. So we flew together to Paris. And the moment Ye heard that this Finrush Taylor earns on every pair 4 times more than Kanye, who was the highest paid artist in the industry with 15% of royalties, Finrush Taylor makes 60% because the economics of printed footwear are so much better. Like then is when he was like, fuck this shit, I'm going to go independent. And then he said all those horrible things so he could get out of the contract, I believe.
Wow. And so today, Is he still working on the Yeezy brand? Are you guys involved with that or not right now?
I can neither confirm nor deny. I mean, Ye has cancelled himself before several times and has been back several times. So let's see. We are here for him anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes complete sense. I guess something that we haven't touched upon, there aren't any head-to-head direct competitors, but there are other people who sort of fall into this category of 3D printing in the shoe industry, most notably Carbon, who you've mentioned a couple times. How do you guys fare against them? And do you sort of envision more competitors coming in soon, or is what you have pretty strong and you're not worried about that?
Yeah, I think Carbon is a joke. And like it has been a huge marketing stunt for Adidas, but I don't see any way that this will stand the test of time. Because look at it, like every future craft shoe is basically just a printed midsole, but it doesn't change anything. Like you still have to stitch it together, you have to glue it together, you still have to do it in Asia, you still have to ship it around. None of those advantages that 3D printing brings are in those shoes. They just look a little bit funky with a green midsole. But that's it. It's a worse product, it's a heavier product, it's a more expensive product. And again, like making millions of times the same shoe, this is not what 3D printing is great at. 3D printing is great at making a million times a different version of the same shoe. And this is where you see that it's a huge marketing stunt. I also believe in a couple of years we will not see them anymore. You already can see how the sentiment changes within those companies. And especially, there are some pitfalls that you can fall into when you choose a 3D printing technology. Like I can understand why Adidas has chosen Carbon, because like on a first glance, it is a very smooth surface finish, which is like very easy with the way that they are printing. But like all the other product features are crap. So it really needed reinvention of an FDM type of technology where we are now printing like fine textile like fibers. So a shoe actually feels like a shoe. It feels like a textile. I mean, again, showing this into the camera now, but like this is like a textile. It's like a neoprene. It's like very spongy, and like really you can see the individual threads there. And what is a textile? It's also just a thread that is like interwoven. And that is what our technology does. And then you can do it in like different ways. You can have closed shell walls, and you can have like upper like materials, and all of that is the same material. It has no glue joints, which means no weak points. And that is the only technology that in the world that can do this. And this is why we are so like passionate about. Carbon can't do multi-material. You can imagine how we can have a carbon fiber enforced plate in some shoes, and like all sorts of different materials, different colors. This is the real deal. This is the holy grail. If you can print this here, hard and soft and all of that, what if you can print a shoe that is better than a Nike shoe, like a traditionally constructed Nike shoe? What stops you from printing tables for IKEA? What stops you printing handbags? What stops you? Nothing. This is the holy grail, a product that is bent millions of times without breaking. This is what it needs. And this is what makes us confident also for the future, because we have solved already the hardest product.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Carbon specifically, it sounds like, one, they're not really taking advantage of the fact that you can customize using 3D. They're still relying on a lot of post-processing, right, when they print?
For sure. It's toxic, lots of post-processing. Here it's just putting in it water, and like we have made machines for it. It's pretty insane. It's like fully automated. You can imagine, you scan your feet at home, the printer here starts automatically. Then you have, let's say you bought this boot. You put this boot and put it in water. All of this melts away, and then it gets dried, and then it can fall into a parcel, and nobody ever touched the shoe. And that is just a huge difference, because this is why we call this a farm, because it's like a server farm. It's like this, those printers can print 200 times the same design on one day and 200 times, like 200 different designs on the next day. It's all software.
Yeah, absolutely. And just some couple final questions here. I wanted to touch a little bit on your guys' team. You have quite an amazing team, and the way that you've hired these people has been pretty non-traditional. I'd love to sort of hear about, who are the people on your team? How big is the team right now? And what are some of the unique stories you've brought together to make this team?
So although we are sitting in Germany, I mean, we are quite happy having a huge network in Silicon Valley that like coaches us. And obviously as a no-brainer. You want to have the A players. And we started out and we did lots of things like doing job ads on LinkedIn and like Indeed and Monster and blah, blah, blah. And like always, I was really disappointed by the applicants. Nobody with real passion. And at some point, we realized, hey, we have one of the biggest YouTubers in 3D printing community is a great friend of ours. And he just loves what we do. And we always like all those 3D printing nerds on earth watch his video. We are all waiting for him to drop a video every Saturday evening. And we were like, I was noticing every of those videos is sponsored by like Audible and Squarespace and like all those totally irrelevant companies are doing promotion there. So I was like, hey, like we, for example, after the Founders Fund round, we wanted to hire the best people. So we were like, hey, bro, what up? Like we called him up. What are people paying for those ads? And we were shocked because this is what we also usually pay for a LinkedIn ad that gets no traction. So we said, hey, can we actually give you some talking points and you do a 30-second or 60-second ad on, hey, if you're a 3D printing nerd, go join Zellerfeld. And we did this. And like within an hour of him uploading the video, we had thousands of applicants. Wow. We had like thousands of people from all around the world of being like, I love 3D printing. I love what you're building. And like that guy like said, we are like the SpaceX of 3D printing and blah, blah, blah. And now the result is that over half of the team, like everybody here speaks English. Over half of the team is not from Germany. It's actually like people all relocated here. Like the guy that does the PCBs, he, for example, Mohammed, he's from Iran. And like in Iran, he was building the best 3D printers he could do. And he was like circumvening like trade sanctions. He was like out of washing machines. He was like soldering out like all those PCBs so he could build better printers. And he was like, please, I want to build the best printers here and make the best PCBs for your printers. And we were like, hell yeah, Mohammed, let's fucking go. So he came here. We had a guy for pellet extrusion. He is called Kevin, and he came from Berkeley, all the way from sunny California. This dude moved over to rainy Hamburg. And we had a couple of other people. Cesare, he came from Italy. And we have so many unique stories here. Yeah. All just because of like this 3D printing god on YouTube that made like a couple of 30-second ads. And now we are like a bunch of nerds here and it's like a fucking blast. We just love building the coolest things in terms of software, hardware, materials. We are like, it's a huge nerd show and it's the coolest thing that we all can imagine. Obviously, it's, as Steve Jobs always said, like self-policing, like the cultural aspect of it. Like we now want to work with the world's best. And we now have a network of 3D printing nerds that is second to none. And like anyone that loves 3D printing, they're always like invited and welcome to join us. Yeah. And this is what we believe makes this company. It's the spirit of, if you have a knack for 3D printing, like this is where we want to build the future. This is where we try to become like an app store of things and stuff. So yeah, that's very exciting. And that also makes many engineers that it's insane if you think about it. When we had the Louis Vuitton show and Louis Vuitton put this on the fashion walk, on the catwalk, we had like all the engineers here, which are super nerdy. All of them would have never thought while they were studying that they will sit at their future employer and actually watch a Louis Vuitton show. Like it was the weirdest thing on earth, but it's lots of fun.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I love how much you guys indexed on just genuine passion is how it sounds like you guys hire. And the result has clearly been absolutely amazing. I guess the final thing is, if someone wants to get shoes, how do they do that? How does someone get Zellerfeld shoes today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You go on Zellerfeld.com, you buy a production slot. And because right now waiting times are actually like 6 to 9 months, like again, like demand is huge, as you can imagine, once Justin Bieber and others wear your shoes. We made it so that while you wait, like new designs get dropped. And 1 or 2 weeks before your production slot for $10 goes into production, like we sent you an email and are like, yo, since you last logged in, 250 new designs dropped. So since your production slot is coming up in a week, you can now choose your final design, whatever you like in that moment of time. And then you just get that shoe delivered, custom fitted to your foot, and you will have an experience unlike anything else before. And if you're really smart, you buy not just one slot, but you buy 5, and you will see that as a visual nudge on the website. It's like a sneaker wallet, as we call it. Because if you're smart, what if what if Adidas or Nike or I don't know, a GH Bass for loafers or a Yeezy drops in 6 months, then you better make sure you have a slot ready. And I don't know, maybe you have some, I mean, you and I are not in the age, but maybe there are like some listeners, especially VCs, that have some teenage kids that are really have a neck for sneakers. The best thing that you can do is just buy a couple of slots, because it's an insurance. It's a reservation for all the future shoes that are coming. So if you're smart, you buy a couple of slots, and whenever your slot goes into production, we hit you up. You can choose your design, and then you get an incredible pair of shoes that you have. It feels like a Tesla. You will never want to go back.
And the slot thing is kind of smart, because this reminds me of, like sneakerheads, when new shoes get dropped on Nike, it's a whole battle to make sure that, you get your ticket in. And so you're sort of giving an option to buy that ticket in advance.
For sure. And also it's a way for us, like 6 months ago, our website was a little bit different. You paid everything like $250 upfront, let's say, for a pair of shoes. And then you had to wait for 9 months. And during those 9 months, lots of people were like questioning, hey, is this a scam? Because like we took $250, and then our communication, because we were working so hard on the printers and stuff, was also not the best. We learned a lot in that phase. But now it's just like a Cybertruck. Like they had $100 deposit. We have a $10 deposit, so to speak. And while you wait, new designs get released and so on. And every day, I mean, those printers, they're already fulfilling 100 pairs a day, let's say. So like every day we are getting closer to whenever you have bought your slot. So we are already fulfilling. It's not like a Cybertruck where for 4 years you have to wait and then the first Cybertrucks are rolling off the production line. No, we are fulfilling every day. But no, that's basically the main difference. But this model also lets us collect orders way beyond our capacity, which will then help us hopefully make also a good point in terms of we learn how much demand is out there, how much bigger the next farm needs to be. Right now we have 200 printers, but we want to build the next farm 5,000 printers so we can reach $100 million in revenue as the next step. And this already gets us a good indication. We can make an informed decision of, do we build 2,000 printers next, or 5,000 or 10,000? And this is why I encourage everyone who wants to support the future of footwear to just buy a slot. It's just $10. Even if there isn't a design that you like yet, you can save that slot for later. And yeah, you really make a great impact, because you help us make the point for a future of footwear that is exciting again.
And one quick note on that, you said, there's sort of new designs being added all the time. Is it right now you guys are the ones making the designs, or is it available for, say, a designer to come out and make their own design?
Yeah, the main thing is we don't want to compete with a Nike, with an Adidas, with an On Running, whatever. No, we want to empower others. We also, we want to build a world in which not the companies with the biggest bank account win, but rather the best products and the best storytellers. So what we have decided to do is not to build a brand that is known for one silhouette, like Crocs, for example, but rather a platform like an app store or YouTube, where now every day we get design submissions where people from all around the world, no matter if it's a student or like a brand, like a really bigger brand, like they come to us and they send us a design based on our guidelines to drop them on Zellerfeld.com. And the reason for it is, you have to imagine on Zellerfeld.com, there are then millions, like there's a community of people that are excited about shoes. There will be millions of people that want to have those shoes. And as a brand, if you don't have a product offering for this new community that wants to have exciting shoes again, then you're missing out this new, really fast growing market of those people that want printed shoes. And so we are really like a two-sided marketplace where new brands are coming in with new designs, and maybe also a few more exciting designs that they usually don't risk or confident enough to risk a new design on the main market because of high upfronts. They then put it on Zellerfeld.com, and then there's a huge customer base of people that are just excited to get new cool shoe designs that you can't get anywhere else. And this is how Zellerfeld.com has become. And I'm just super proud of it because me as a consumer, like, I mean, it's so cool. Every day we see here new shoe designs that like literally pop out of the printer, and we have never imagined those designs to be possible. And it's just like for a sneakerhead like me, it's the coolest job in the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Cornelius, I've taken up a lot of your time and I appreciate this so much. For those listening in, obviously, please go visit Zellerfeld's website, check out the shoes, buy those production slots. You're going to thank, future you is going to thank yourself for maybe even getting a couple, it sounds. And for anyone else interested in joining the company, what's the best way to perhaps reach you and your team?
Probably the best way is either the contact form on the website or shoot me an email on cornelius@zellerfeld.com. We're always happy for people being interested in joining the revolution and the movement in whatever way possible. May it be for investors, may it be for brands, may it be for consumers, may it be like whatever it is, just engineers and software developers. We become more and more of a software company. So if there are any good software developers out there, please reach out. Yes. And yeah, this will be lots of fun. This is still just the early days, but like we see lots of traction that like makes us confident that we will get printed shoes on every foot. And if you just want to be part of that adventure, yeah, just send us an email, send us like a message on the contact form. We are really happy to hear from everyone who wants to join.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of 1 to 100. Please send it to any talented operators looking to join their next company. Ratings and reviews are extremely helpful for a new podcast, and you can let us know which other companies you'd like us to profile. 1 to 100 is a podcast from the Why You Should Join newsletter and Turpentine, the podcast network behind the Econ 102, Complex Systems with Patrick McKenzie, Turpentine DC, and more shows for experts by experts in tech.